Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you all post session. Today we are fortunate enough to have speaker like Niharji. So I hope everyone will enjoy the session. To start with, I request uh, all of you to please welcome our today's speaker Niharji with a round of applause. Now I request immediate past President CA Vimal Agarwal ji to welcome our today's speaker. I'm only going to introduce Niharji. Friends, in Mira Bhainder, we don't need to introduce Niharji, or I can say even entire region, because he is like a Sachin Tendulkar in direct taxation, and he doesn't need any introduction. But just to do, huh? Virat Kohli, now Virat Kohli. Yeah. Very true, very true. नहीं, I thought सचिन तेंदुलकर का पर्सनालिटी भी सर से काफ़ी मिलता है. Anyway, sir has been watch bearer to all of us in all the major taxation issues, and his views were always considered as a path to follow by so many professionals. So, just to those for the benefit of others, presently he is in practice since 1984. Presently a vice president taxation at Reliance, and heading so many other chapters and so many other areas. It is a very long list, so I don't want to go into the depth of it. Straight away, I request our honorable speaker to start the session. Thank you.
The chairman of the branch, CA Nitesh Kothari, immediate past chairman Vimalji, CA Nitesh Shah, two Shahs on the dais, and friends. In fact, ICDS का कुछ ऐसा हो गया था कि मैं आ रहा हूँ, फिर एक टाइम ऐसा लगा कि ये तो गवर्नमेंट डरा रही है, अभी आने वाला ही नहीं है, और फिर सडनली ये बजट के पहले फाइनली रिवाइज्ड ICDS का डिक्लेरेशन हो गया कि वी आर इम्प्लीमेंटिंग. एंड फॉर चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट्स, although it was relevant to learn it from the point of view of computation of income of our client more particularly, I think after form number 3CD was amended, probably we will learn it more intensively, because now our responsibility is not confined to compute the income of the client, but even certify whatever adjustments we are making in the computation. In clause 13 of form number 3CD, they have added clause D and clause E. Clause D is a simple table where on the left side they have given one column in which they simply write ICDS 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And on the right side, we are supposed to give only one figure per ICDS, increase or decrease. And then in clause F, and please note it carefully, because so many ICDS require us to make certain disclosures. And it's a question where to make these disclosures. So in clause F, particularly for accounting policies and other disclosures, they have once again listed ICDS 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 10, and on right side space is given to make those disclosures. So not only we are required to compute the additions and deductions for every ICDS, but we are also supposed to give disclosures in this clause E for each ICDS. And I think before, I've always said at every seminar that ours is the lowest paid profession probably. And for that, only we are responsible, because we are so much afraid of charging. And we always think that if we charge properly, not more, if we charge reasonably, the client will go away. I think with so many opportunities now coming up in our way, like ICDS, GST, insolvency and bankruptcy law, in international tax BEPS, which government has started implementing partly with equalization levy, and so many new amendments which will come next year. I don't think we should price all these new products as low as we have priced the old products. And therefore, for ICDS, client will always have a huge misunderstanding that not even a fresh clause is added in form number 3CD. A new clause specially is not added. In clause 13, only two sub-clauses are added, D and D. And the way they are added, they are so misleading that when client will see it, client will say, इसमें क्या है? 10 आइटम में प्लस या माइनस देना है, 1000 रुपया ज़्यादा ले लो. Client will never realize to study these 10 ICDS how many efforts you have to make, and many times for those additions and deductions, to make the judgment, to arrive at judgment, how much mind you have to apply to look at the past case laws, the prevailing accounting standard, this provision in the ICDS, and what will prevail over what, and with so many FAQs, what kind of study you are required to do. And I think the only way, and I'm spending these 5 minutes to just see that whatever efforts you are putting in, you get remunerated appropriately. Probably you will have to show your working papers to the client that to fill up these two sub-clauses, what kind of efforts you had to make. Then only he will appreciate what kind of extra fee you can charge. Now, so much about the fees, and I have always felt that for all this learning, the time that you are investing, the money that you are investing must be recovered from whatever certification work you have to do. Now, I think in the preceding sessions, the other ICDS were already covered. So the background has been covered. I need not go into the background, except for saying that this exercise started somewhere in 1997, when in section 145(1) they added two accounting standards. And at that time, not only our institute, but many industry bodies represented that we can't have multiple standards. And when the institute standards are approved by NACAS, which is under the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, under income tax, no separate standards are required. The government was convinced at that time, and they stopped issuing new standards. And again, Mr. Chidambaram in 2011 woke up and said that no, I want tax accounting standards separately. And then again we had to chip in and tell them that you can't have a separate set of tax accounting standards. You can't ask all taxpayers to maintain two sets of books of account. And then finally they came out with a clarification that this will not be called tax accounting standards, but this will be called income computation and disclosure standards. So with this background, and again before we start, one point which requires clarification, and which they have clarified in circular number 10 of 2017, which was issued on 23rd March 2017. Clarification number 1 which was required was that you want not only accounting policies to be disclosed, and we will see in out of 3 accounting standards or in ICDS that I am covering, in 2 what kind of disclosures are required. Where will a taxpayer make disclosure? In notes to accounts, disclosures are made in respect of normal accounting standards. So where will I make disclosure of ICDS? And if I am required to make, then where do I make? So they clarified that you are required to make disclosure in form number 3CD. And as we discussed, clause 13, subclause E, that is the place where you are required to make disclosure. So another question came up, that if suppose I have 2 heads of income from business or profession and other sources, and for computing income from both the sources, I follow mercantile system of accounting, but I am not subject to tax audit. If I am not subject to tax audit, then I can't make disclosure in form number 3CD. So where am I required to make disclosure? And this circular, please note it carefully, clarifies then you are not required to make any disclosure. Only in your computation of income, you make adjustment of addition or deduction as required by any specific ICDS. So I think we can conclude in this manner. Number 1, ICDS is applied only where assessee has income under these 2 heads and where he follows mercantile system of accounting. But disclosures will apply only if you are liable to get accounts audited under section 44AB. Otherwise, you are not required to make disclosures. So that is the clarification. Secondly, another question may arise that if you look at ICDS, ICDS reiterates that SSE can follow any one of the methods of accounting, either mercantile or cash, but hybrid system of accounting cannot be followed. Now this has created a misunderstanding. We had certain court judgments which said that suppose under the head business, I am running 2 or 3 different businesses. I maintain separate books for each business. And I want to follow mercantile system in respect of 2 businesses, but cash system in respect of 1 business. Can I follow? And there are number of court judgments which I need not repeat, which say that yes, source wise under the same head of income, you can select your method of accounting. Again, out of these 2, any one, either cash or mercantile. Now, if I do that, there was a confusion whether this will be taken as hybrid. The answer is no. Because for any one source of income, suppose I record income on accrual basis and expenditure on cash basis, or vice versa. Income on cash basis and expenditure on accrual basis, it is hybrid system and it is not permitted. But if I have 3 different sources or 2 different sources of income, for each source, I follow any one method, either cash or mercantile. Can I follow? The answer is yes. And in such a case, if I follow different methods for different sources, then only for those sources of income for which I follow mercantile system of accounting, ICDS will apply. Now again, this will create sometimes a little complex situation. For example, suppose I am a proprietor of a business, or even if I am a partnership firm, and I run 3 businesses. For 2 I follow mercantile system, for 1 I follow cash system. turnover of all three exceeds 2 crores, but turnover of the two, any two, does not exceed 2 crores. Am I liable for tax audit? The answer is yes, because the tax audit limit of 2 crores applies per SSE. It does not apply per source of income. But again, if I am liable for tax audit and for one source of income the client is following cash system, ICDS clause 13D and D will apply only for those two sources of income for which he follows mercantile system of accounting. So it may create a complex situation. And I have seen many partnership firms, some of the private companies earlier, now private companies cannot follow cash system because Companies Act doesn't allow. But many partnership firms continue to follow different methods of accounting for different sources of income. And auditor may have to be very careful while auditing the accounts of different sources of income. So that is one point which is worth noting. Another point which probably earlier speaker might have dealt with, but again it affects the three standards that I have to take up. So I would like to touch upon it. The last circular of 23rd March clarifies that if a particular court decision holds differently than what is provided in ICDS, because all ICDSs are prepared carefully, after considering all case laws, ICDS will override those case laws. How far this is true or how far this is correct? Because after all, this is a CBDT circular. And I remember I have learnt from day one when I learnt income tax that CBDT circulars are binding if they are benevolent. If they are against the SSE, then they are binding on tax officers but not on taxpayer. So is this circular binding on us? I think the answer is yes and no. When yes and when no. Let us try to understand. Suppose there is a case law interpreting a particular accounting standard. There is a case law which interprets whether a particular receipt is capital or revenue. And I see the case law says that this particular receipt is capital. ICDS says that no, this should be treated as revenue. Then what will prevail? Then ICDS may prevail. The reason is that accounting standard is not part of the Income Tax Act. To compute income, we follow accounting standards. But on the other hand, suppose there is a decision interpreting a particular section, say section 5 of the Income Tax Act, whether a particular source of receipt is chargeable to tax. And let me give one example which I am going to cover in construction contracts. Retention money. Whether it is a source of income on which charge materializes even before what is provided in the contract itself. Contract says that after building is constructed, and if the contract is for 10 crores, I will pay you 9 crores, 1 crore, that is 10% I will retain. I will see 2 monsoon seasons if there is no leakage. If your sewerage, pipelines, electric lines, everything is working all right, I will pay that 1 crore. Now here under section 5, the question is whether charge materializes when the contract is made on that retention money of 1 crore. Charge materializes when the contract is complete, or for that 1 crore, it is chargeable only when 2 years are over and the contractee confirms that, yeah, I am satisfied with your work and now this 1 crore is due to you. There are case laws in our favor. Accounting Standard 7 provides that retention money can be recorded only when that lock-in period is over and the contractee confirms it is payable. But ICDS says that no, contract receipts are inclusive of retention money. Now this is a question whether it is a question of law related to section 5, and if there are case laws in our favor, whether those case laws will prevail or ICDS will prevail. One can take the view that case law should prevail. In other words, any case law which interprets an accounting standard or which issues a circular which takes a position which is debatable, ICDS will prevail. But if there is a case law interpreting a provision of the Act and ICDS provides differently, even today that case law is valid and this circular is not applicable to it. Now friends, Institute's guidance note on ICDS will probably be released in the next week. Very carefully, a team has worked where one ICDS was given to one group. 10 groups were formed and 10 groups have very carefully designed this guidance note. So although I had the privilege of going through the entire guidance note, because at the last DirectX committee meeting only that guidance note was discussed. So wherever applicable, I will take things from there and we will discuss today. But before you really carry out your audit, have that guidance note with you, and today you need not buy, because as soon as it is finally approved by the committee, it will be put on website. You can download and take a printout. It is an exhaustive, almost near to exhaustive guidance note, which will give you guidance on what position to take in different situations. So you can have benefit of that guidance note little later, say later in next week. Now, this is the background with which we will discuss these 3 accounting standards. I am not giving background once again. I am not discussing these general principles once again, but whatever was worth discussing, we have discussed in detail. Now let us take up the first ICDS, which is allotted to me, that is ICDS 2, valuation of inventories. And here there are some points of distinction which we will have to carefully note. Let us start with the meaning of what is inventory. And as per ICDS, because as per ICDS, inventories are assets, and you can read here, held for sale in the ordinary course of business, in the process of production for such sale. So if you are a manufacturer, even raw material, work in progress are your inventories. In the form of materials or supplies to be consumed in the production process or in the rendering of services. So even material which is used in rendering services will be treated as inventory. Generally, chartered accountants do not value closing stock of stationery and so many other consumables. But if you go strictly by this standard, even a service provider should value his inventory and take it as closing stock. Our normal accounting standard AS2, let us compare it. It gives exactly the same definition. There is no distinction. So here we need not spend more time on discussing. There is no difference. Let us see. As per AS2, inventories are assets held for sale in the ordinary course of business, in the process of production for such sale, or in the form of materials or supplies to be consumed in the production process or in the rendering of services. No difference at all. And this definition we have done several times. So what is inventory, we need not discuss in detail. Now coming to what are the exclusions from the application of this ICDS on inventories. And the exclusions are work in progress arising under construction contract, including directly related service contract. So if you are valuing inventory of a construction contract, we have AS7 as normal accounting standard, and we have ICDS 3, which is the next ICDS, separately for construction contract. So AS 2 will not apply and ICDS 2 will not apply. AS 7 will apply to construction contract and ICDS 3 will apply. Then shares, debentures and other financial instruments held as stock in trade. In fact, these will not be covered under inventory. If they are held as stock in trade, there is a separate ICDS securities which you must have done by now, and we have a separate accounting standard for valuation of securities, normal accounting standard. And if they are held as investment, as capital asset, then they are to be valued at cost. And if it is a company holding these investments as capital asset, then subject to impairment test which is to be applied under normal accounting standard 28, it will be valued at cost. So that is how shares, debentures and other financial instruments will be valued. Then producers' inventories of livestock, that is animals like cows, bullocks, which are used for business, they will not be valued under AS2 or ICDS 2. Agriculture and forest products. Agriculture and forest products, there is a separate accounting standard and they will be valued as per that standard. Mineral oils, ores and gases, to the extent that they are measured at net realizable value. But please remember, although this is a PPT and it is not mentioned, but in the ICDS it is very specifically mentioned that mineral oils, ores and gases are to be valued at NRV, net realizable value, in the hands of producers. That means if I am engaged in E&P business, exploration and production business, I am extracting oil and gas, I am supposed to value the quantity lying under the sea as per the separate guidance note and separate standard. But if I am a trader in oil and gas, I buy petroleum product from E&P producer and sell it in the market, then stock of oil and gas or ores will be regarded as inventory and it will be valued under this standard. So that is the distinction. And machinery spares are not covered as inventory. So these are the exclusions. Now let us go ahead with the method. See, we have seen what is the meaning of inventory and what is specifically excluded from the meaning of inventory. Now, which method for valuation of this stock is permitted? So first of all, I think we should not have any confusion between method of valuation of stock and method of computation of cost of stock. This ICDS talks of first by which method you can compute cost of inventory. This FIFO, weighted average, LIFO, NIFO, all these methods are not methods of valuation of stock. They are methods of determination of cost of inventory. And under the AS2 as well as ICDS 2, only two methods are permitted, and that is FIFO or weighted average. Any one of these two methods can be followed for determining the cost of the inventory. Then what is method of valuation? It could be any one of the three methods. Either you may value inventory at cost, or you may value inventory at NRV, or you may value inventory at cost or NRV, whichever is less. So any one out of the three methods. There are some organizations which value them only at cost, some only at NRV, and some only at lower of the two. But all those who are valuing at cost alone or NRV alone, they are not following the principle of prudence. So a company cannot follow a method which is other than cost or NRV, whichever is less, because you have to observe this principle of prudence, that wherever you expect a loss, you have to record it. And please remember, in some earlier session, somebody must have told you that now mark to market losses are not allowed as deduction unless they are specifically allowed under a specific ICDS. ICDS 2 very specifically permits taking cost or NRV whichever is less as the value of inventory. So when you take whichever is less, and suppose the net realizable value has fallen, and you take the lower value, indirectly what you are doing, you are marking to market the stock of inventory, and it is allowed under ICDS 2. So you can take it at lower of the two. But so far as method of determining cost is concerned, only FIFO or weighted average cost is permitted. Now ICDS says that for determining cost, you may also follow retail method of accounting. Where will you follow retail method? In fact, retail method is not officially recognized, but it is a method on which you can fall back, because there are so many departmental stores which sell so many small things that it is not possible for them to maintain day-to-day stock record. And for them, valuation of inventory on item to item basis is so difficult that ICDS itself recognizes that in such cases you can follow retail method. What is retail method? You know what is your profit margin, average profit margin on each product. So from the sale, when you deduct that average profit margin, the cost of goods sold will be arrived at. So from opening inventory, add purchases, when you deduct this cost of goods sold, you will be able to arrive at what is the value of closing stock. This is called retail method, indirect method. But again, please note, this is permitted only when it is almost impossible to segregate inventories and value them separately. They are so mixed up and there are so many small items that you may be forced to follow, say, retail method. Then, although officially nowhere in AS2 it is written that you can follow standard cost method, but indirectly, unconsciously, we were always following standard cost method for determining cost of work in progress. You tell me by which method you can determine cost of work in progress. Some level of estimation has to undergo its valuation, because when inventory is completed, and you may claim that it is finished to the extent of 50%, 60%, it is an estimate. And then when you conclude it is completed up to 50% level on 31st March or 60% level, again determination of cost is based on certain standard cost that goes into manufacturing. So earlier ICDS 2, the original ICDS 2 said standard cost method is not allowed. So then institute told them that you tell us how will you determine work in progress. Finally, we will leave it to tax officer that if you have any method of working out actual cost of work in progress, you tell me or teach me. And then they understood that such stock can be valued only at standard cost. So in the revised ICDS which they issued in November 2016, they have amended the standard and very specifically provided that now you can value work in progress by standard cost method. So this is how we will value inventory. And certain costs which are not part of inventory valuation, and the same is the position under AS2, are abnormal wastages are not added. Storage cost is not part of your cost of inventory. Administrative overheads and selling costs, these are not added to value the inventory. So exclusive of this cost, you have to arrive at cost of inventory. Now let us come to valuation of inventory for service contracts. AS2 does not include work in progress arising in the ordinary course of service providers. And under ICDS, it specifies that it does not apply to work in progress which is dealt with by other ICDS. So work in progress of construction contract will not be covered under this ICDS. Any other work in progress will be covered under this ICDS. And definition of inventory does not include services, but if you have a stock, then you can value that stock at cost or NRV, whichever is lower. Valuation of service inventory, as I mentioned, can be lower of cost or NRV. And the cost of services, in the case of service provider, shall consist of labor and other costs of personnel directly engaged for that service. Now, although I am going to cover it under ICDS 3, very briefly, how will you record income arising from services? Now, particularly for a chartered accountant, generally all services are provided within a period of 1 year, generally. At year end on 31st March, there may be very few services which may not have been completed, and you may not have billed for those services. And generally, if we are following mercantile system, we prefer to bill for that service only when service is complete. But now, even under accrual method, the next ICDS makes it clear that a service provider has to follow percentage of completion method. And if you have to follow percentage of completion method, I think when we are dealing with inventory, let me deal with this aspect here. Let us take an example that on 1st January of a financial year, your client tells you that I want to process a loan for 100 crores for my company. So I am giving you 3 tasks. You prepare project report, number 1. Number 2, you present this project report before a bank or financial institution. And number 3, it is your responsibility to get this loan passed. For all these services, I will pay 10 crores of rupees fee. 100 crore project, the loan to be taken, 10 crore is your fee. Now on 31st March, this contract is given to you on 1st January. On 31st March, you have prepared a project report. So preparation of project report is over. On 30th April, you have submitted this project report to a good financial institution where you feel you have comfort and you can get this project loan passed. Negotiations go on. You are finalizing accounts of 31st March. Still, loan is not passed. You finalize the accounts on 30th June. Loan is still under negotiation. And finally, the loan is passed in the month of August. You have completed your accounts and filed your return. Now, if you have to follow percentage of completion method, and you imagine situation where client said your composite fee up to the stage of getting the loan passed is 10 crores. In the month of July or August, when the loan is passed, bank says that your project is not worth 100 crore. So I will pass a loan of only 25 crore. So client says that I will pay you fee of only 1 crore. When you filed your return on 30th June, suppose your accounts were ready. Now if you go quantity wise, then preparing project report, filing with bank and negotiation. Quantity wise, how much work is completed? Quantity wise, 50% work is complete when project report is ready. Officer may say, I will tax on 5 crore fee because 50% work is over. On the other hand, next year client pays you only 1 crore. So in current year you are paying tax on 5 crore. Next year you write off bad debt and then claim refund. Or maybe you may not write off bad debt because you may follow normal accounting standard where you may not follow percentage of completion method. So there you have not recorded income of 5 crores. But in ICDS for computing income, the officer has taken 5 crores as your gross income. So what is the solution to this? Generally we take a mandate from client. These 3 works and fee will be 10 crore. And then finally he pays depending on success. Although in the letter of appointment they nowhere write it is success based. So what you will have to do now, in this simple example, probably all milestones you will have to get specified. The client will agree that when project report is over, you will be paid only 1 crore. Only 1 crore is due to you. When you submit project report, another 25 lakhs is due to you. And for negotiation, 8 crore 75 lakhs is payable. You should get these milestones written in the contract. Now I have given a very simplistic example of a chartered accountant, but this position you will find many times if you have a good big architect as your client, a big engineer who is carrying on EPC contracts, where milestones are either specified, where your job will be easy to work out on POCM, that is percentage of completion method, the income of the client. But if milestones are not specified in the contract, many times there will be a big dispute between your argument and the assessing officer's argument. And then he may try to tax as much as possible in an earlier year, and you may end up claiming refund in a subsequent year. So these situations may arise. Particularly service providers will have to be extra careful. If they are following mercantile system of accounting, then this percentage of completion method will require advanced planning, and you will be required to ask client if he is a big client rendering complicated big services, that milestones must be specified in the contract itself. Now coming back to service contracts, where how inventory will be valued. Now definition of inventory does not include services. Valuation could be at cost or NRV, whichever is lower, and cost of services in case of service provider will consist of cost of labor and other costs of personnel directly engaged in providing the service. So this is how you will value inventory. What will be the opening inventory? Now this is a transitional provision. If you have opening inventory brought forward from preceding year, for the first time for assessment year 17-18, ICDS will apply. So it clarifies that the value of opening inventory will not change. You can continue that value even if it is in stock at the close of the year. Suppose the inventory was in stock on 1st April 16 and the same inventory continues on 31st March 17. You can continue to value at the same rate unless the NRV has fallen. So same cost you can continue. In case of newly commenced business, now common understanding is that in case of newly commenced business there is no opening inventory. But suppose the department argues that whatever you purchase at the beginning, I will take it as opening inventory. So the standard clarifies that your actual cost of purchase when you start the business will be taken as cost of opening inventory. Then cases of conversion of capital asset into stock in trade. Again, it will be as per section 45, which says that when capital asset is converted into stock in trade, the fair market value on the date of conversion will be taken as its cost when this stock is sold in future. If business is commenced with acquisition of running business on slump sale, the price that you pay for acquiring the business will be the cost of the entire set of assets, and the inventory can accordingly be valued. If you have purchased for slump sale, you will have the scope of allocating cost to each and every asset, and the buyer will be able to allocate cost. If partner takes over running business of a firm or LLP, the price agreed to be paid by the partner will be the cost of opening inventory. Method of inventory valuation we have already discussed. Standard cost is now permitted. I think this is a major retrograde step taken in framing this ICDS. I remember this ALA firm's decision of the Supreme Court. When I was in final CA in 1983, this was a High Court decision at that time. And then Supreme Court confirmed that decision. Later we got the same decision in the case of Sakthi Trading Company. What are these two decisions and what ICDS is providing now? In accounting standards, we have got going concern concept. And the accounting standards provide, our normal Indian GAAP provides, that when any concern ceases to be a going concern, it is either dissolved and the business discontinues, or it goes into dissolution. All assets are to be valued at fair market value, all assets. So even inventory is covered. It is required to be valued at fair market value. But when the business comes to a standstill, it is stopped, it is discontinued, it is no longer a going concern. The income tax department, the assessing officer, in case of ALA firms and in Sakthi Trading, valued closing stock of a dissolved partnership firm at fair market value. And here, how was the firm dissolved? There were two partners, one expired, but the partner, surviving partner, continued the same business. He did not stop the business. There was a technical dissolution of firm. And AO said that because the firm is dissolved, I will value your inventory at fair market value. And fair market value was much higher. So as soon as business is discontinued, even if fair market value is higher, stock is required to be valued at FMV. And SSE argued that this is a technical dissolution of the firm. The surviving partner is continuing the same business. So business is not discontinued. How can you value stock at FMV? And when the matter went to Supreme Court approved the contention of the SSE that here there is no discontinuation of the business. The same business is a going concern under the new form of carrying on business, that is proprietary concern, and therefore stock for the purpose of preparing the accounts of the firm up to the date of death of the partner is to be taken at cost or NRV, whichever is less, and not at NRV which is higher than cost. Now ICDS provides that when a firm is dissolved, even if the continuing partners continue it, continuing partner in case where there is technical dissolution, the stock is required to be valued at fair market value. There are many businesses in which, particularly if it is a manufacturing concern, there is a big markup on finished goods when it is sold, 25%, 30% markup. And if suppose this business is carried on by a firm, one partner either retires or dies and the surviving partner continues business, ICDS says, even if it is continued, Supreme Court decision will not apply and you will have to value inventory at fair market value. Now here one question may arise which we discussed in the beginning. Can we say that in these two decisions, the Supreme Court interpreted a provision of the Income Tax Act? I think we can't say that. Supreme Court gave decision on interpretation of accounting standard, a normal Indian GAAP accounting standard, that what is the meaning And if ICDS wants to override that accounting standard, it can override, and probably this will be a pain area for all those partnership firms which get technically dissolved on the death of a partner or on retirement of a partner, and it becomes a proprietary concern. Our representation is pending with the government. It is pending with CBDT, and we insisted upon them to rectify this standard so many times, but they are not rectifying this. They say that our intention is to tax profit on unsold inventory if a firm is technically dissolved. So we will not amend it. And again, we brought to their notice that this is not the principle that you are clarifying in the circular number 10 of 2017. In the circular of 23rd March 17, they have clarified that there will be no mark-to-market loss allowable. At the same time, mark-to-market gain will not be taxable. So on the other hand, you are giving assurance, on one hand, you are giving assurance to SSE that just as we will not allow you mark-to-market loss, we will not even tax mark-to-market gain. And from backdoor in ICDS 2, you provide that if a firm is technically dissolved but is continued by surviving partner, we will tax mark-to-market gain based on fair market value of inventory. So this is not in line with what they have clarified, but this is going to create confusion. And again, we are after them that you issue further clarifications and clarify this. Let us see whether they clarify. But this will be the position if they don't clarify. Now disclosure part, which you are required to make if the client is subject to tax audit in 13E. The accounting policies adopted in measuring inventories, including the cost formula used, that is FIFO or weighted average, whichever formula you have used, you are supposed to disclose. Where standard costing has been used as a measurement of cost, details of such inventories and the confirmation of the fact that standard cost approximates the actual cost. As auditor, we will have to give there that although WIP is valued at standard cost, it is as near to actual cost as possible. It approximates the actual cost. And the total carrying amount of inventories and its classification appropriate to a person. Whatever may be the total value of inventory, you will have to bifurcate into different categories and give it in the disclosures. This completes inventories. If there are questions, we can discuss. Otherwise, I will first complete the standards and then you may ask. Whatever way you want, we can. Any questions on this, or should I? Yeah. Technically, it is dissolution. And if you see, when a firm is converted into a company, when a company is converted into a firm or LLP, the department is today taking a stand that suppose there was accumulated profit, the moment it is converted into LLP, I will treat it as deemed dividend, because partner is at liberty to withdraw that profit at any point of time. Now, if you go by that logic, then here also the same position, that when it is converted into a company, when it is converted into any other form, probably it is dissolution of that firm. I do not know whether we will be able to, and it does not appear to be logical to argue that it was a partnership firm converted into LLP, and under the Income Tax Act, the status of both is firm. So it should not be treated as an old firm dissolved and a new LLP coming into existence. One may try with this argument, but whether it will be successful or not only when it is tested in any appellate forum, we will come to know whether it will survive. But today this argument will be available, that you were taxing firm as firm, you are taxing LLP as firm. So where is the dissolution? One can argue.
Thank you, sir.
Shall we start with the next standard then? Now, construction contract. I think first let us discuss applicability. Our normal AS7, which deals with construction contracts, applies only to contractors. It does not apply to real estate developers, that is builders. For builders and developers, the institute has issued a separate guidance note. And as per that guidance note, we are supposed to compute income. Unfortunately, as per that guidance note, even a real estate developer or builder is supposed to follow percentage of completion method if one condition is satisfied. If substantial risks and rewards are transferred to the buyer, even a builder or developer is supposed to record revenue even in the case of an incomplete contract. Now I am discussing this first and coming to ICDS. Here there is one dispute among the interpretation of in the interpretation of that guidance note between the tax authorities and us. Tax authority says that, take for example, a builder is constructing a 10-story building, 10-floor building. You have bought a flat on second floor, for example. The building is under construction and you are supposed to pay slab wise. As the slabs get completed, the builder has told you that you pay according to completion of slabs. So you are going on paying. Now, so far as that builder is concerned, we as chartered accountants argue that substantial risks and rewards are transferred to the buyer only when the building is complete. Only when I have received occupation certificate, NOC from municipal corporation. Till that time, if that building falls down because of earthquake, fire, anything, the risk is mine. It is not risk of buyer. This is our argument. Tax officers have taken argument that no, you have transferred risks and rewards to the buyer. Why? Because you have entered into agreement to sell. But even before building is complete, he wants to sell that incomplete flat to anybody. He is at liberty to sell. If prices have gone up, then it is the reward of buyer. He will be able to sell at higher price. If prices have gone down, it is the risk of buyer. He will suffer the loss. So you have transferred risks and rewards to buyer. And here this line of argument is going on. Many cases are pending in tribunal, I know. And there probably tribunal is of the view that when you talk of substantial risks and rewards, it talks of final risk. If the building falls, if anything happens to building, at any point of time, who is responsible to make good the loss? It is the builder till the time NOC is received and he hands over possession. So till that time, one cannot say that substantial risks and rewards are transferred. Now in these circumstances, can we as chartered accountants take the view that I want to follow project completion method? According to me, yes, but subject to the remarks of certain courts in certain judgments that moment 75 to 80% of the building is over, you should start recognizing revenue, because at that stage you cannot postpone offering tax on revenue, which is almost certain. So irrespective of the guidance note, there are decisions which say that once more than 75 to 80% of the work is complete, the builder or developer should start recognizing revenue. But again, according to me, it gives substantial relief. On 25, 30 and 50% completion, builder need not offer income to tax. And when it is substantially complete, probably the builder will not have much difficulty in offering it to tax, except for one major hurdle that this standard has created, and we will see it little later. What is that hurdle, or what is that drawback? We'll come to that little later. Now this is applicability of AS7, whether ICDS 3 applies to developers or not. There is no clarification in ICDS, but the way it is drafted, it should apply only to contractors and not to real estate developers. What will contract cost include? Contract cost under AS7 includes direct cost, cost allocated to the contract, cost specifically charged to the customer under the terms of contract. This is fair enough. Let us come to ICDS and see the distinction. The scope of the contract cost has been widened to include allocated borrowing cost in accordance with ICDS on borrowing cost. You know what will be the implication of this? There are number of tribunal judgments which have approved an argument that in the case of a contractor, suppose he is constructing that building with borrowed money, then interest cost is period cost. It is not cost of the project. Interest cost is period cost. So what the contractors were doing so far, that even on incomplete contract, they were debiting interest to profit and loss account and claiming it as deduction every year. But now with this provision in ICDS 3, the allocated borrowing cost will have to be added to the contract cost. And if suppose the contract is incomplete, the borrowing cost will get reflected in the closing stock. So you will not get it as deduction. Its allowance will be postponed to the time when the contract is complete. So that will be the implication of this. You will find such small changes which will affect computation of income, and you will have to distinguish your own computation of last year when you prepare the computation of income of financial year 16-17. Then recognition of contract revenue. When will you recognize? Contract revenue to be recognized if it is possible to reliably estimate the outcome of a contract. AS7 says that even while following percentage of completion method, you can recognize revenue when it is possible to reliably estimate the outcome of a contract. ICDS provides, if it is possible to reliably measure the outcome of a contract, this part is omitted from ICDS. It only says contract revenue to be recognized when there is reasonable certainty of its ultimate collection. Now, let me give a simple example. That a building is complete up to 30% extent, and you have sold certain flats in that building. Say building will consist of 50 flats and you have sold 10. Now to whoever you have sold is financially sound, and whatever he has committed, he will pay, and there is reasonable certainty of ultimate collection of what you have contracted for. Under ICDS, you are supposed to record, but under AS7, you can say that although 30% of the work is completed, it is not possible to reliably estimate the outcome of a contract. At 30% level, I am not able to estimate whether there will be profit or there will be loss. So under normal AS7, your offering of income on percentage completion method may start at 50% completion, may start at 60% completion. Until that time, you may be able to claim it is not possible to reliably estimate what will be the outcome of the contract. But under ICDS 3, and you will see later they have laid down in the ICDS that once 25% of work is complete, you must start offering revenue on percentage completion method. So whether it is possible for you to reliably estimate outcome of the contract or not, finally the contract may result in loss. And if it results in loss, then what will happen? Today you can judge. If it is not possible to reliably estimate, you can postpone declaring income to next year. And what most of the contractors do, you know what is the culture in building contractors? They form one partnership firm or one company for each contract. They dissolve that firm at the end of the contract. And why they do so? Because in their project, so many investors invest for that project only. So when the project is complete, they would return the money of all those investors. So they form one partnership firm and dissolve it at the end of the contract. Now you imagine a situation that at the end of first year, your 30% of work is complete. On percentage completion, and we will see in the next slide, that our AS7 allows us to even provide for expected expenses, estimated expenses. ICDS does not allow you. If you permit, in between I will go on having tea so that we can avoid break. So ICDS does not permit providing for estimated expenses. So suppose when your 30% work is over, on percentage completion, you offer some income and pay tax on it. But when 100% is over, the prices of cement from next year goes up. Prices, the labor cost goes up. And ultimately when entire contract is complete, it results in loss. Can you get refund? There is no backward set off of any income or loss. If loss occurs in the third year, you can't go backward and set off for the first year of the contract. You can only carry it forward to next year. In foreign country, this kind of provision is okay, because in UK, US, you can carry forward your loss to preceding year also, up to 5 years backward. Here it is not allowed. So if you want to make such provision, you should also make provision for carry forward, carry backward of losses to earlier years, which they are not permitting. And many contractors may really find it difficult, because in today's scenario, if you see, if it's a big construction contract, multi-story buildings are coming up. At the end of first year, second year, even a contractor who is given a fixed lump sum amount by the contractee does not know whether it will result in profit or loss. So ultimately in third year, he may face difficulty that I have paid tax on estimated income on percentage completion basis. On ultimate completion of contract, the contract has resulted in loss. And if this partnership firm or company was formed only for that specific contract, business may not continue and he may not be in a position to carry forward loss. So this could be the difficulty. Then AS7 lays down conditions to estimate the outcome of construction contract in case of fixed price contract and cost plus contract. ICDS is silent on the same. Now I think most of the construction contracts are on fixed price or on cost plus price. So I don't think we have major grievance that ICDS does not specifically lay down that it is a fixed price contract or cost plus contract where you have to follow percentage of completion method. It's okay. Now situation when outcome of contract cannot be reliably computed, estimated. AS7 provides that contract revenue and contract costs should be recognized as revenue or expense by reference to percentage of completion method if the outcome of contract can be estimated reliably. Revenue should be recognized only to the extent of contract costs. See, if you are not able to recognize revenue reliably, then AS7 gives you liberty that you recognize revenue only to the extent of cost incurred. absolutely rational provision. I am not able to estimate. Whatever is my cost, to that extent, I will recognize revenue, not on the basis of percentage. ICDS simply says that early stage of a contract shall not exceed 25% of the stage of completion. In other words, as soon as 25% construction is over, on percentage completion, you will have to estimate revenue and offer it to tax. You can't restrict it only to the extent of cost on the ground that I am not able to reliably estimate the outcome. So that is the drawback. In AS7, there is no quantitative threshold laid down. I told you that under AS7, we can contend that even at 50% completion, I am unable to reliably estimate outcome. So you can start on percentage completion when 60% is over or 70% is over. But under ICDS, as soon as 25% completion is achieved, you will have to start offering income to tax. A big departure is in retention money. And that example I gave you, what is retention money? If contract is for 10 crores, you will find that in every construction contract there is a retention money clause, that I will pay you 90% on completion, but 10% I will retain for a period of 1 year or 2 years, by which I will arrive at conclusion whether you have completed contract satisfactorily. So AS7 very rightly provides that contract revenue shall comprise of the initial amount of revenue agreed in the contract. In our example, initial amount is 9 crore, whereas ICDS says contract revenue shall comprise of the initial amount of revenue agreed in the contract, including retentions. So even that 1 crore, you will have to record as income on completion of contract, although the contractee may pay the balance 1 crore after 2 years. Now what happens? After 2 years, the contractee says that no, there is leakage here, your electrification work is not proper, I will not pay 1 crore, take 10 lakhs and finish it off. Then what is the remedy? Earlier we had tension that if that happens, then I have paid tax on 1 crore, I will not get deduction by way of bad debt. Why I will not get deduction by way of bad debt? Because accounts will be prepared under normal AS7. Under normal AS7, retention money is not part of my revenue till the time the contractee agrees. So on completion of contract, in books of account, I did not credit retention money of 1 crore. Now after 2 years, if the contractee says I will not pay, I can't write off as bad debt. But then after we expressed this concern, they amended section 36, subsection 1, clause 7, that if any amount offered to tax under ICDS, which was not credited as income in books of account, is not receivable, becomes not receivable, it will be allowed as bad debt, although you have not written it off in the books of account. So there is an exception provided, a proviso is added in 36(1)(7), and you may make note of it. Year in which it becomes bad debt, there is no need for you to show to the officer that I credited this income in an earlier year and now I am writing off. Simply show computation of income of the year of completion, where in computation you have added 1 crore, and say that now it is not recoverable because see this letter, see the correspondence, my contractee has denied to pay say 90 lakhs or whatever. So whatever he doesn't pay, you can claim it as bad debt. Angelic International Limited's decision will not be applicable now, where the court said retention money is not part of your income. Incidental income. Again, they are fan of Tuticorin alkali decision, And that is why, and you must be remembering that famous Supreme Court decision. I'll come to that little later. Let us see what is this. AS7 says that any income incidental to the contract can be deducted from contract revenue. It need not be offered as income. Whereas ICDS 3 says that contract costs shall be reduced by any incidental income not being in the nature of interest, dividends or capital gains that is not included in the contract revenue. So if your capital which is temporarily free and contract will go on for 5 years, you have borrowed money and you invest it in some securities temporarily because it is not immediately required. The interest or dividend that you earn, dividend of course would be exempt, but if any interest income is earned, it will be taxable as income from other sources. In other words, it says the Supreme Court decision in the case of Tuticorin alkali and chemical will apply, and in the case of Bokaro Steel will not apply. These two were very famous decisions. I hope you remember. Tuticorin alkali was reported in 227 ITR. Bokaro Steel was reported in 236 ITR. You can see that now any incidental income you will have to offer to tax. You will not be able to deduct it from the contract cost, which normally we were doing when we prepared contractor's account. Recognition of foreseeable losses. I told you this earlier, that AS7 allows you to make provision for foreseeable losses. If you see increasing trend in prices and your contract is going to last for 5 years, under AS7 in books of account in second year, third year, you can make provision for this increase in prices, the unforeseen losses. But ICDS 3 does not allow you to provide for foreseeable losses. So that is major drawback, and that is why I said that it may so happen that in the initial year on percentage of completion you may offer income to tax, but when the contract is finally completed at the end of third, fourth or fifth year, contract may finally result in loss. So in that case you will not be able to recover the taxes that you paid in the first or second year. Then for a company particularly, if you want to see, it may result in double taxation also. Suppose the contractor is a company, and suppose in year 1 in the books of account as per AS7 the company made provision for expected increase in prices of raw material or expected increase in labor cost, 5,000 rupees. The income was 4,000. So far what we were doing, we were computing income of only 1,000 rupees. But now ICDS 3 says that such provision for expected losses will not be allowed as deduction. If it is not allowed as deduction, in year 1, what will be the result? As per books of account, there will be loss. But as per computation of income, 4,000 rupees will be taxable income. What will happen in next year? Suppose this expected rise in price actually happens. Then next year you have actually incurred loss. But in books of account you debited it last year. So last year's P&L showed loss of 1,000. Next year's P&L you are not debiting because you followed AS7. Now your book profit will be higher and you will pay tax on book profit under MAT. So there could be double taxation in some cases. If the contractor is a company, then there is a possibility of double taxation also. Even this was pointed out, and it was said that there may be a very few contractors who may manipulate and provide excessive losses. But for such contractors, you can't punish everybody and say that I will not allow expected losses. Because see, the basic principle is that when you follow percentage of completion method, You are estimating income. Income itself is estimated. So how can you estimate income on the basis of the sale contracts that are negotiated on the basis of percentage completion? And you do not allow expected losses to be provided. So principally what you are doing is you are taxing estimated income, but you are not allowing estimated expenses. So far as ICDS 3 is concerned, this is a big mismatch that we may see in future. Recognition of incentive payment. Many times there may be provision in the contract that I am giving you a 10-story building to become constructed. If you finish within 2 years, then 10 crores is contract price and I will pay you 5% extra if you finish within 2 years. And if you finish after 2 years, then you will not get this extra 5%. So that 5% is incentive payment. Our AS7 says that incentive payment should be recognized only when probability exists that prescribed performance standards would be met or exceeded. And you can see guidance para in ICAI guidance note, and which links probability. Our AS7 guidance note of the institute links probability to contract progress up to sufficiently advanced stage. In our example, if the contract is to be completed within 2 years, and suppose it started today in January, then 2 years, let us say it started in May, then 2 years will be over in next to next May. Now ICDS says that at the end of, on your first 31st March also you have to account for incentive income of 5%. Whereas AS7, our institute guidance note says when contract has sufficiently progressed. So not first 31st March, but when you arrive at second 31st March, when the contract will be completed in 2 months time, May, you will be able to visualize whether it will be complete in 2 months time or not. If the answer is yes, you make provision for 5% and offer it for tax. But if suppose sufficient work is left, at the end of 2nd March, you need not record 5% as contract revenue. I think this is a big gap in what our AS7 provides and what ICDS provides. And particularly in a bigger contract where 5% is a huge amount, maybe the builder contractor may pay tax in first year itself on percentage completion, and contract may not get completed within the prescribed time limit. He may not ultimately get that 5% revenue. Of course, here proviso added in 36(1)(7) will apply, because this income you are offering as per ICDS, so you are not recording in books. But if it becomes bad debt because you could not achieve the performance standard, you will be able to claim it as bad debt. Then recognition of claims. Again, AS7 says that if you have made claim for extra cost that you have incurred, because normally what happens in construction contract, a drawing is approved by contractee and you are told that you construct this building and contract price is say 10 crores. But afterwards, as the building construction starts, some extra mandate may be given for which there may be extra claim. So AS7 says that if you do anything extra which is not specifically provided in the contract, you should record your claim for that extra work only when the other party has accepted it, when there is sufficient progress in the negotiation. You can see this is what is provided in AS7. ICDS 3 simply says that if there is reasonable certainty of collection, you should record it, whether the other party has recognized the claim or not. So where will certainty come from? If he doesn't admit the claim, why should I record? but that is what ICDS provides, and here there could be dispute between the officer and the contractor. And particularly for such claims, one should be very careful. Don't put up claims till the time you negotiate orally. Once you raise the bill or add in the running bill, the officer will not agree that your negotiation for extra claim has not sufficiently progressed and I will not tax it now. He may tax it. And contract revenue and contract cost, and this is transitional provision which is very important for every one of us. If a contract already began before 1st April 16, then you can record revenue as per the normal practice that you were following so far. But if the contract commenced on or after 1st April 2016, then ICDS 3 will apply. So if you are auditing accounts of a contractor whose contract had already started before 1st April 2016, you need not apply ICDS 3 and you can compute income as per AS7. This is transitional provision. It will apply to all contracts which commenced on or after 1st April 2016. Yeah. Sorry, there is. Yeah. If there is an amendment in contract, then you will have to go by. But if your contract started before 1st April 16, the amendment to the contract will not be regarded as beginning of a new contract. It is only an addendum to the existing contract. So you may follow the normal practice. It will not, unless your amendment is such that it gives rise to a totally fresh contract. For example, contract on a plot of land was to construct one building here. In the same contract you add that now construct, because a municipal corporation has allowed additional FSI, you construct another building in another part of the plot, then they will regard it as a new contract. But suppose in the existing contract something new is added, there is some amendment, your contract, if it had begun before 1st April 16, you can go by AS7, ignore ICDS. And disclosures. The amount of contract revenue recognized as revenue in the period, giving the bifurcation of even retention money. The methods used to determine the stage of completion of contract in progress. Generally, it is based on architect certificate. For contracts in progress, again further disclosures, the amount of cost incurred and recognized profits less recognized losses up to the reporting date. Very specifically, separately to be disclosed in 13E. The amount of advances received, the amount of retentions to be separately disclosed. But please remember, if any contractor whose revenue in a year does not exceed 2 crores and he goes by 44 AD and doesn't get the accounts audited, in that case, this standard will not apply at all. But if audit is applicable, then only these disclosures will apply. If audit is not applicable, these disclosures will not apply. And one more point related to contracts before we come to foreign currency translations. That in the case of these FAQs which are issued on 23rd March 17, it clarifies that if suppose you are not liable for audit, if you are not liable to maintain books of account, whether provisions of ICDS will apply. Now, if this question is asked, our general answer would be no. That if I am not supposed to maintain books of account, no, ICDS should not apply. But the FAQs clarify that for the purpose of computing turnover, because suppose your turnover is 1 crore 50 lakhs and you are paying tax at 8% on 8% of the income or 6% of the income, because now the next budget provides that if everything is received by check or whatever amount is received by check or account pay check or through bank, on that only 6% will be computed as income. So the FAQs clarify that for the purpose of computing that gross receipt or turnover, ICDS will apply. So what will be the effect? In inventory, you know that ICDS provides that you have to follow section 145 capital A. And what does section 145A lay down? I have not discussed this because this provision came long back and we have deliberated number of times. 145A provides that for computing we will complete. So where were we? Because 145A provides that your opening stock, purchases, sales and closing stock should be inclusive of taxes, whereas AS2 provides that all these should be exclusive of taxes, and we debit or credit taxes separately in P&L account. So for the purpose of computing your turnover or gross receipt, ICDS says that you will have to go by me, not by AS2. So to that limited extent, ICDS will apply. Please note it carefully that when you compute income of your client under 44 AD, at least turnover you compute as per ICDS. Then it will be based on 6% or 8%, depending. 6% will be from next year, 8% for 16-17. Now I am told that time is available up to 4 p.m. and we have to vacate. Fortunately, foreign currency translation, certain provisions were omitted by the amended ICDS and we may have to rush. Will they allow leverage of 5 minutes or 5-7 minutes, or it will be exactly 4 o'clock? 5-7 minutes, 10 minutes. Let us go little bit fast. Foreign currency translation. I think before I start with this slide, a small background. You all have done Accounting Standard 11, and what does it provide? That at the end of the year, if you have liability in foreign currency or asset in foreign currency, you are supposed to mark to market that liability or asset. How do you mark to market? A simple example. I imported goods for $1 lakh. On that day, the price was 60 rupees per dollar. I paid $90,000 to the supplier during the year. But on 31st March, $10,000 are yet to be paid. And on 31st March, rupee dollar rate is 62 rupees. So now 10,000 into 60, my liability appears at 6 lakhs. But I will have to mark it to market at 6 lakhs 20,000. And 20,000 rupees difference I will debit to P&L. By ICDS 1, this mark to market loss is not allowable unless it is specifically provided in any other ICDS. Please note, ICDS 6 specifically provides that this mark to market loss on these liabilities or assets is to be allowed as deduction if it is loss. It will be taxed if it is income. So ICDS 6 specifically provides. Now in this ICDS, what are the other important points? You must be remembering in AS 11, the liabilities and assets are classified into monetary and non-monetary. So first let us understand what is a monetary liability. My creditor, my bills payable or an outstanding loan is a monetary liability. What is monetary asset? My debtor is my monetary asset. Then what is non-monetary asset or liability? If I issued shares in foreign currency and it is lying as equity capital, it is not payable by me in cash, it is non-monetary. If I have imported machinery and it is lying in my assets, it is non-monetary liability. If I imported raw material or finished goods in which I am trading, and those goods are in stock on 31st March, it is non-monetary asset. Again, between the monetary assets and liabilities and non-monetary assets and liabilities, there is distinction between capital and revenue. If I borrowed money and acquired machinery, my liability, monetary liability loan is on capital account. But if I borrowed money in foreign currency and imported my stock in trade, then this liability is revenue monetary liability. Right? Monetary, non-monetary, again capital or revenue. And how we will compute income when we mark to market these assets and liabilities on 31st March. So let us start with revenue monetary items like trade receivables, payables, bank balance, or even a loan. Revenue monetary items. As per AS 11, this is reported using the closing rate. We discussed that you obtained loan in January. On 31st March, if $1 lakh is outstanding, you will value it at the rupee dollar rate on 31st March. And the difference will go to P&L. If there is profit, credit P&L. If there is loss, debit P&L. Exchange difference is recognized in P&L. It is allowed under the Income Tax Act also. What is the position in ICDS? It is just the same. We need not discuss this. ICDS also says convert it into rupee at the closing rate, and whatever is the difference, it will be allowed as deduction or it will be taxed. Loss deduction, profit tax. Next, revenue non-monetary items. Inventory. Suppose you imported goods worth $10,000 in January. By 31st March, you have sold inventory, half of it you have sold. So $5,000 worth of inventory is in stock. Now you will value it at cost or NRV, whichever is less. What is the rule of valuation under AS 11? If it is valued at cost, because cost is less than NRV, then you will apply the rupee, dollar, or whichever country's currency it is, rupee dollar rate of the date of purchase if it is valued at cost. If it is valued at NRV, because after you purchased, its NRV on 31st March has gone down, then it will be valued at the rate of currency prevailing on 31st March. This is as per AS 11. What as per ICDS? The same. No difference. Previously, ICDS provided that even if it is valued at NRV, it will be valued at the rate prevailing on date of purchase. Then we represented this is not correct. So in the revised ICDS issued in November, they have amended and said that if you have valued inventory at NRV, you take closing rate, currency rate, that is on 31st March, and value the inventory accordingly. Now coming to capital monetary items, I think this is the place where we need to discuss. Normal AS 11 requires, and let us understand, I borrowed $1 lakh and imported plant and machinery. I borrowed $1 lakh and imported plant and machinery. Possibility 1. Possibility 2, I borrowed $1 lakh and purchased plant and machinery locally from India. In both the cases, my liability is on capital account and it is monetary item. What will be the accounting treatment? What will be the treatment for computation of income? So far as $1 lakh taken as loan, with which $1 lakh worth of machinery is imported, the treatment under the Act and under ICDS is the same. It will go by section 43 capital A of the Income Tax Act. What does 43A provide? That whatever is the profit or loss on currency loss on this $1 lakh, if there is a loss, it will be added to the cost of the asset. If there is profit, it will be reduced from the cost of the asset, but on actual basis. It means if I borrowed $1 lakh in January, on 31st March, I have not repaid that loan of $1 lakh. In books, I will pass entry. In books, what entry I will pass, I will discuss separately. But in income tax, the loss will be added to the cost of the asset when finally I pay the loan. Suppose next year I pay only $20,000. At the time of payment, if there is foreign currency loss, add it to the cost of the asset. If there is foreign currency gain, reduce it from the cost of the asset. As you go on paying the loan, adjust the cost of the asset accordingly. This is what section 43A permits. In accounts, what will happen? I have borrowed $1 lakh, imported machinery. As per normal AS 11, the difference should go to profit and loss account. If loss, debit P&L. If profit, credit P&L. But some years back, in 1998, it was represented to the government that foreign currency is continuously falling. And if our liabilities are marked to market and debited to profit and loss account, continuously our results will show losses. And these are not our operating losses. Actually, we have borrowed money and acquired capital assets. So if currency is continuously falling, it is not within your control, then you allow us to capitalize the loss. And government issued notification under which institute added para 46 to the accounting standard 11, that up to the year some 2004 or 5 it was to be allowed to be capitalized. Again, currency was continuously falling. So the industry, the businessmen approached the government that you should allow this capitalization further. So up to 2020, again government issued notification that you can capitalize. Para 46A was added to AS 11. So far as accounts are concerned, the choice is allowed to the person who has borrowed. If you have borrowed money and acquired capital asset, whether imported or purchased locally, then you can either debit the loss to P&L and credit profit to P&L. Choice is yours. Or alternatively, you should capitalize the loss. If there is loss, add to the cost of the asset. If there is profit, reduce from the cost of the asset. This choice was allowed. But once this choice is exercised, you have to consistently follow the same. You can't say that in first year I will capitalize, in second year I will take it to P&L. So whatever you do, you have to consistently do. Now, income in income tax is what? So far as liability created on imported asset is concerned, position is as per section 43A of the Income Tax Act, 43 capital A, that you have to capitalize the foreign currency difference on realization basis. When you actually repay the loan, whatever is the loss, add to the cost, whatever is the profit, reduce from the cost. But suppose you borrowed money and purchased the asset locally, then para 46A you may adopt. In books of account, you may capitalize the loss. You may capitalize the gain. But ICDS says that if there is profit, we will tax it. If there is loss, we will allow it as deduction. So if there is loss, it will be allowed. ICDS specifically provides. Here there is conflict of judgment. We had Supreme Court judgment in the case of TISCO and also in the case of Satluj Cotton Mills. In both these decisions, the Supreme Court said that if I borrow money and acquire a capital asset locally, my foreign currency liability is on capital account, and even the foreign currency translation difference is also on capital account. So if there is profit on conversion of currency, it will not be taxable. If there is loss, it will not be allowed as deduction. Now ICDS says if there is profit, it will be taxed. If there is loss, it will be allowed as deduction. In fact, it is a fair play, but the only point is whether ICDS will prevail or the judgment of the Supreme Court will prevail. Here, previously, the advice of legal experts was that a court decision would be binding, ICDS can't override it. But now, because ICDS are notified under Section 145 finally, under Section 145 the government has notified. Now the final view is that if there is a court judgment interpreting provision of the Act, it will prevail. But if there is a court judgment interpreting capital revenue treatment under accounting standard, ICDS will prevail. The safest way for any of us would be go by ICDS. If there is loss, allow it. If there is profit, tax it. Only point of caution for you is that even during the current year, there was consistent fall in rupee. Although of late there is some gain, but up to March there was consistent fall in the rupee value. So you will find that even for financial year 16-17, there would be currency loss. And client would be happy if you say that I am reporting that this is an allowable loss. But suppose the trend of recovery of rupee continues as it has happened in April. Suppose it continues in 17-18. Your client next year, if he is learned, he may say कि अभी तुम TISCO follow करो. It is on capital account. You can't do that. Whatever stand you take, you have to consistently follow. And my advice or rather suggestion would be that whatever stand you are taking on such case laws, please give it in disclosure. In 13E, under each ICDS, you can give disclosures that you want. As auditor, wherever clarification is required, you have taken a stand based on some case law, based on provision of the Act, based on rules, because the FAQs say that if there are existing rules, ICDS cannot override existing rules. So if any existing rules you find is different than ICDS and you are following the rule, give such clarification in 13E so that there is no complaint on account of a chartered accountant being negligent. So please be careful. And I think with this we have already discussed. Conclusion, I have already told you can go by ICDS. And on foreign currency, on integral, non-integral, whatever clarifications were there in ICDS, they've already withdrawn under the revised ICDS. So I had those slides which I have removed because they are not necessary now. Now, foreign currency treatment for your integral and non-integral assets outside India, it will be the same as you give under the accounting standard. There is no difference. If there are questions, you may ask. Otherwise, if time is getting over, already I have exceeded the time. Then let me thank the branch for giving me the opportunity of presenting on these 3 ICDS. It was a revision for me too. Thank you.
I request our chairman Nitesh Kothari to offer our memento to speaker sir.
Sir, we are highly obliged to have you on this session. You were not required to thank us. It was our pleasure to have you on this session. And I also take an opportunity to thank the Direct Tax Committee who accepted our invitation and took charge to organize this today's session. Thanks once again to all the speakers. They have really given their insight on the ICDs. We were focused on GST, but after today's session, I think now after the worry of GST, the worry of ICDs will also have started amongst our members. It's not only GST is going to trouble us for a practice time, but the ICDs is also there. So it is going to be a tough time, and really to once again revise the point of Niharji, we have to be pinch hitter on charging the fees what we are giving the time on the assignments of the clients. We have to be strict enough to charge the fees. Without your participation, this event was never a success. We got a tremendous registration. At the outset, early morning, we were in a bit worried whether so much registration we will be able to suffice to with respect to the facilities to the each and member. And mind you, your participation has encouraged us a lot, because we are from Vasai branch here, we hardly see a local members. We can see the faces who are outside the branch. Sir, this is a big moral booster for our, because the members have come from Masjid Bandar, Andheri, Borivali. So thanks for your continuous participation, and we will like to see you further. We also having a GST National Conference on 13 and 14 May. We request you to register yourself for that GST conference also, which is again with the Indirect Tax Committee of ICI. Thank you.